In the decades following the American Civil War, the United States was largely focused inward, exploiting the vast American West, building out its railroads, and developing an industrial powerhouse. Foreign affairs barely registered in the minds of most Americans. Even President Benjamin Harrison echoed the isolationist spirit of George Washington, declaring the United States should be an apart nation and insisting that it should remain that way. But internal growth has a way of changing perspectives. By the late 19th century, the very forces that had preoccupied Americans, industry, wealth, and westward growth, were now pushing them to look outward. Let's get started. By this time, the United States had already dipped its toe in overseas expansion. Alaska had been purchased from Russia in 1867, and a foothold in Samoa was established by 1878. But next came Hawaii. Since its founding in 1795, Hawaii had been a sovereign kingdom. However, the islands quickly attracted American investors, especially in sugar plantations. With economic interest came political ambitions. Pearl Harbor also drew attention as a strategically ideal naval base. In 1887, the U.S. began leasing it. Tensions soon followed. High taxes and tariffs cut into the profits of American and British born sugar planters. These groups, backed by mid level U.S. diplomats and military officers, supported rebellions and coups, eventually overthrowing Queen Liliuokalani in 1893. President Grover Cleveland investigated the incident and found that U.S. personnel had overstepped their bounds. But the tide of American imperialism was rising. 5 years later, under President William McKinley, Hawaii was formally annexed in 1898. What drove this new outward vision? Part of it stemmed from domestic turmoil. So called Jingos, enthusiastic expansionists, believed that bold foreign policies and even war could unite a fractured nation through renewed patriotism. Then there was competitive impulse. Europe had already carved up much of Africa during the Berlin Conference of 1884 and was now turning toward the Far East and China. Many Americans feared being left behind in the race for global markets and influence. Manifest Destiny was far from forgotten. With the Western frontier declared closed, Americans began to look overseas. They felt it was their duty, perhaps even their divine mission, to spread democracy, Christianity, and civilization. By 1900, over 18,000 American missionaries were working around the world. American exceptionalism and Anglo-Saxonism added fuel to this ideology. Influenced by social Darwinism, many Americans believed the white Protestant race was not only superior, but destined to rule. They believed that strong nations were meant to dominate the weak because, well, it was the natural order. Few men shaped American expansion more than U.S. Navy Captain Alfred Thayer Mahan. In 1890, he published The Influence of Sea Power Upon History. In it, Mahan argued that national greatness came from naval supremacy. To be a global power, he argued, America needed a strong navy, a merchant fleet, foreign commerce, and a network of bases and colonies across the seas. Mahan's ideas were embraced by key figures, none more enthusiastically than Theodore Roosevelt, who at the time was the Assistant Secretary of the Navy. Roosevelt made sure that every American ship had a copy of Mahan's book on board. By 1896, the United States had gone from a modest naval force to authorizing or building 11 modern steel battleships, a major step toward becoming a world power. Above all, American imperialism was driven by economics. The Second Industrial Revolution had transformed the United States. Factories were producing goods at unprecedented rates. But with overproduction came a problem: where to sell it all. Business leaders demanded new markets. Investors sought new lands where capital could grow. And manufacturers needed raw materials, especially from tropical or undeveloped regions, to fuel the machines of progress. Imperialism, to many, was just good business. Not everyone was on board. In 1899, a broad and diverse group of critics formed the American Anti Imperialist League. Among them were steel magnate Andrew Carnegie, labor leader Samuel Gompers, social reformer Jane Addams, and numerous Democratic and Republican politicians. Though they came from different walks of life, they were united in their belief that imperialism betrayed American values. Some objected on racial grounds, fearing that new colonies would bring an influx of what they considered inferior populations, particularly with the Asian population. They feared that they would pollute the American bloodline. Others, like industrial workers, feared cheap labor from the colonies would undercut their wages. And for many, the issue was moral. How could a country founded on liberty govern people without their consent? Senator George Frisbee Hoar of Massachusetts condemned the acquisition of foreign vassal states. He warned that America was trampling on its own principles, the very spirit of the Declaration of Independence. By the dawn of the 20th century, America had clearly stepped onto the global stage. Its factories roared, its navy sailed far from home, and its flag flew over territories like Hawaii, Samoa, and beyond. Expansionism, once dismissed by American leaders, had now become a defining feature of U.S. foreign policy. Whether justified by destiny, race, commerce, or power, the turn outward marked a profound transformation. The United States was no longer just a continental power, it was becoming an imperial one. That's all the time we have for today. Thanks for joining me. We'll see you next time.